Morning. Hey, so we're at San Francisco CrossFit, and what I'd like to do is go over the little article we posted up last week or a week and a half ago about finding that target. And what we're going to do is we're going to go over not only what's going on with movement, but how we're going to address these things with mobility, with programming yourself out. Like, what are you going to do today based on what it is we're giving you and what it is I've shown you here. Okay, so what I want you to take a look at is how we've got the A, the B, the C, and this is introducing task priority. Okay, so we know what A priority has to be if you absolutely cannot squat, if your squat's horrific, if you cannot externally rotate, if you cannot get those knees out, pressing, okay, if you cannot press correctly, or deadlift, if you can't pick an object up correctly, running. So mostly what we're dealing with here are a lot of endurance athletes, right? And I deal primarily with these people, and myself included, and I end up faulting very intricately with a lot of overextension as I break down or I get slow. So I know that there's these things that go wrong with myself. Broken! Who's that? So we know that these things need to be corrected, and through other movement patterns we start to understand where these things originate, what's going on. I mean, why is my foot collapsed, right, when I run? Or when I land, why are my arches on the floor? That is not an okay position. We know what the good positions are. We know we shouldn't be here. So how do we address this stuff? I've done some stuff like with Rich Airy where we were showing when he runs and he ends up breaking in that overextended state, and exactly what happens to him when he starts to press, and all of a sudden fatigue, and it's boom. And we see this even with the highest level athletes, and we know where these holes are. So we know how to start with these A priority things. Okay, what are the biggest glaring defects? We identify through, here's just a couple of these exercises or movement patterns, okay? And then we want to kind of take a look at time. But what if we also wanted to take a look at, I don't know, mobility? Who would we address with that? Curious.
So look, one of the ways that we can talk about this is that we can talk about a tissue approach, and this is what we've traditionally done. So you're like, hey, quads and anterior hip. That means this system, this anterior chain is tight, right? And so I can mobilize that, I can roll that, I can open the hip, I can think about those terms. This doesn't mean anything, and this doesn't have any context. And here's our problem with that. Hey, I identify short tissue, that's great, and then I just magically mobilize that and hope that it reconstitutes into those positions without understanding the good positioning. It's sort of a press and guess model, which is what we've done forever and ever. Every athlete in the world knows they need to roll around on a ball or a roller, they need to mobilize, but unless we kind of take the next step. So what's the next step? Well, understanding what the good position is. So one of the huge pieces that Brian just talked about is that when we see short anterior hip, shortened tissues here, which happens when I'm an athlete. Whatever sport you're going to do is going to put you into a certain pattern of dysfunction. You can't get around that. So runners look like runners, lifters look like lifters, rowers look like rowers, right? The idea is to try to minimize that, or at least be aware that I'm going to have these problems. So if I know that I'm breaking or I'm running and broken, one of the things we need to understand is that the position at the end of kind of the gait cycle or the running cycle is that this leg is moving into extension, and the stable position for the hip and the good position for extension is in internal rotation. The femur is spinning in. This is internal rotation and extension. So look, quads and anterior hip come tightest, internal rotation plus extension. So this gives me a second way to start thinking about, oh, well, I know what the chief position is where I need to be working, and I need to be working on internal rotation and extension. The problem is my wife and my athletes don't know what internal rotation and extension is. That means nothing to them. But where we do go and where we want to spend time is thinking about mobilizing a movement pattern. And this becomes suddenly, oh, I'm improving my running position. As I'm translating, that foot has come off the ground, it's pulling, and if I'm missing this range, I tend to break. The leg swings out, I tend to overextend, I swing back around and look at my next fault position. So what do I need to do? I need to mobilize the start position and running, and basically the finish position and running. Can I get into those good positions? And what we find a lot is that our athletes are missing hip flexion, right, which is the kind of start of the strike. So start position, foot strike. Man, brutally short, can't get in a good position to pull, right? And my finish position is as that foot comes off the ground and I'm starting to pull. If I'm missing this good kind of corner, and this is why you've got to understand the technique. If you don't understand the technique, then all you're ending up doing is trying to kind of cobble together these ideas. But my finish position is that leg behind into that good position. Now I'm mobilizing a position and I'm improving a movement pattern, right? Will I see these things reflected in things like the clean, short in the hip, going to be broken. The back swing of the pull-up, if I can't extend and stay tight, I'm going to break. My jerk, if I jump and land and the foot is turned out, it's going to reflect in the same movement patterns over and over again. And all we have to do is watch an athlete run and start to challenge their speed or challenge their cardiorespiratory capacity or metabolic demand or strength, and all of a sudden we see the defaults in those positions because they can't buffer. So what I'm going to say that is if we're working on these core values and thinking about this core, what I can do is, instead of to over complexify TM, this central concept of what's going on, I'm going to choose one or two things and I'm going to hammer it. So my A priority for today is going to be standing on, opening up the anterior hip and extension, maybe mobilizing anything that's tight in this position, and I can apply my sliding surfaces to this, I can work on the hip capsule to this, I can think about the muscle tissue into this, right? And that's what I'm going to hammer on. It's 10 or 15 minutes of priority. You do not have a lifetime to mobilize. What we need to do is create a task priority today, we get it done, and then tomorrow we can work on the next piece, which maybe looks like, hey, I'm really missing this flexion, which also reflects my control and motor control when I squat, and improve that, and start to build relationships. I'm not mobilizing hip flexion, external rotation, I'm mobilizing squatting, which is weird that the squat mechanic and the running mechanic end up being very similar because it's hip flexion. That's these stable positions. And then, maybe I touch base with this, but then, the next day, it's all going to be about my landing position. Boy, I really noticed that I'm really stiff through here. I don't have a lot of range. I'm missing dorsiflexion, foot coming up. I tend to run around that ankle. So now the third day ends up being, hey, let's prioritize lower legs and bottom of the feet. And suddenly, mobilizing this thing isn't crazy. It's one piece at a time as it reflects the movement, start position, finish position. Should I see these things improve over here? Absolutely. It's the kind of conforming or the mutually accommodation of these different movement patterns that make this really easy. Choose one or two pieces at a time. As Brian says, what's my priority for the day? What am I thinking about tomorrow? And then I build my little bit mobility program around that.
Yeah, so real quick, so what we're going to do is you're going to take that A priority stuff that you're working with, right? We've got this mobility piece. How are you going to integrate it into something like this? What are you going to do for a workout? Why not test it? Where am I going to fall? Or is my load too heavy? Am I going too fast? Is the intensity too high for my level of skill? Or am I just way too high a volume for something? What if you can't run 5 kilometers without going to shit and overextending and heel striking and being completely broken? Maybe you're not spending enough time with the skill on this stuff and prioritizing that to learn it, then integrating that intensity with the time as you bring out the time of that stuff, okay? And it's not just about lowering the volume, it's about lowering the load or the intensity or the volume in order to adapt to your training ability, okay? So, take the piece which Star Ed introduced, bring that into what it is we're talking about with movement, prioritize starting here, bring it out each segment. I don't care if you've got to go out to Z, okay? Know how to do it. You want to focus on these A priority things for more amount of time. So you're going to probably spend maybe 3 or 4 days a week on priority stuff, right? going to spend 10, 15 minutes on these pieces that you know you're missing, that you know you are bad at. Then start to move out. Maybe 2 days on the B's, 1 or 2 days on the C, 1 or 2 days as it gets further and further out to the things that you're just incredibly good at. What if you do run well and can hold it for 20 miles? Good. Go out and run 20 miles. Hold it. Now let's come back in and deadlift. Oh, what? You can't pick something up right?
Brilliant. All right.
Right on.